Vintage Story recently got a pretty big update, and after asking for some feedback, I decided to start a brand new world. This time, I would make a few small changes. My starting climate would be warm instead of temperate. Lightning could now start fires. Soil would be an unstable block. Caveins would be turned on. The world map would be color accurate. And land cover would be reduced to 80%. The block instability in Caveins would increase the challenge of the game, and the fire from lightning would be a potentially interesting experience. The color-accurate world map would be a quality of life improvement, and the changes to climate and land cover would make exploring more interesting, since a warm climate should bring new plants and animals, and 80% land cover should increase the chances for large oceans. I briefly considered choosing a class I was unfamiliar with, such as the tailor who could craft clothes, but I ultimately chose clockmaker again, since it would enable me to make a device for taming locusts. My first steps into this new world were met with rain pouring from the sky. Nearby, I spotted a forest of giants. Great redwoods towered higher than any tree I had seen before, and I knew choosing the warm climate had been the right call. I could enjoy both the beautiful scenery and the benefit of such enormous trees. A single redwood worth of logs would provide a great deal of material for building, firewood, and coal. As I turned away from admiring the canopy above, I spotted 2 yellow apple trees and proceeded to mark them on my map. I immediately had to dodge an attack from a bowthorn. As I attempted to run away, the ground collapsed beneath me, and rifts opened on all sides. A quick check revealed that rift activity was apocalyptic. It seems the beautiful scenery had come at a cost. I took a moment to check my map and decided to explore an interesting white spot nearby. As I approached, multiple rifts opened around me, reminding me the danger had not yet passed. The white spot was merely a hole in the ground, but at the bottom of that hole was a rusty gear. Excited, I gathered soil to go after it, only to be reminded that dirt was now affected by gravity. As I tried to figure out how to get down, I ended up being hit by sliding dirt and thrown into the hole. At least I was able to grab the gear, though climbing out took some caution and luck. A nearby lake caught my attention, and there I found my first instance of red clay. I would have to return for it another time, since my pocket space was limited, but I made sure to mark my map in the meanwhile. Shortly after, I found my first bear, and then fell into nearby water trying to avoid it. I hadn't made any tools yet, and had no way of fighting back. Thankfully, the bear did not follow. This encounter reminded me that I at least needed a knife and an axe, so I could get the bare minimum to survive the night. I also needed food, so I harvested the nearby berries, but decided to leave the bushes where they were, since my pocket space would remain limited until I could craft some baskets. I harvested a few cattails and made sure to take the roots for food. While cutting the cattails, I was nearly crushed by falling soil, but I didn't let that get in the way of my desire to craft baskets. Unfortunately, this area didn't have many cattails, and I barely gathered enough for 2 baskets. I traveled further and further as I searched for more. determined to gather enough for maximum day 1 inventory. Everywhere I went, a rift opened. I'd never seen this much day 1 activity and decided I would have to travel much farther away if I wanted to find somewhere to build my first home. Finally, I built all 4 baskets and began looking for some place to settle down. I wanted to be near the redwoods and the cypress trees, since I wanted to use them in building. I also needed to be sure I picked a place with good temporal stability, a minimum of medium fertility soil, and water nearby. I paused my thoughts to admire some ruins, although I couldn't approach them because of the rifts, but I could mark them on my map. A wide open plain extended before me, and I wondered if this would be a good place to build my home. This idea became especially tempting when I came across a piece of loose meteoric iron. I marked my map, but left the piece where it was. That way, when I returned, I would know exactly the spot to dig. I also marked the nearby swevite on my map. I couldn't remember what it was exactly, but I felt like it could be useful. In the meanwhile, the sun was setting, and I needed shelter for the night. I chose to dig into a hillside and stepped back as the soil collapsed around me. There would be no dirt hut this day, at least not the traditional kind. A hut of rammed earth, however, was absolutely in the cards. Now, I just needed some wood to build a fire. And of course, I had forgotten to gather some earlier. Thankfully, it wasn't completely dark yet, so I ran to the nearest tree, chopped away, and then hurried back to my temporary shelter. As I closed myself in, I was plunged into darkness. I forgot how pitch black the unlit spaces can be. I created a temporary opening, prepared my campfire, and started cooking the cattail roots. I then realized I hadn't saved any logs to make a door, and it was too dark to look for another tree. But maybe there was something else I could use. Nearly all the gates required logs, which I no longer had. All except for the wattle gate, which only needed 3 sticks and a knife. I didn't have enough to fill the opening, so I held some rammed earth in my hands, ready to seal the space if needed. As I huddled in the corner of my earthen hut, I listened to the falling rain. Pulling my map from the ether, I began to inspect my surroundings. The redwood forests were easy to locate, with their spots of orange wood dotting the dark green of leaves. I spotted at least one area that looked like red clay, and then marked the location of my night 1 hut, just in case I needed to find it again. By now, I had marked several places of interest on the map, all of which I would have to return to once I had a base with proper storage. With nothing else to do, I took a moment to simply listen to the rain and the thunder. With each flash of lightning, I wondered if a fire had started. If it did, would the rain immediately put it out? In any case, I had nowhere to go until morning. Unexpectedly, my fire went out. I added more firewood, surprised that it had been used up so quickly. Did items burn faster in this update? If so, I would need considerably more firewood than previously, or I would only be able to light a fire for cooking purposes to avoid wasting fuel. This was another reason I needed to be near the redwoods. I would need a constant supply of firewood. I also absolutely needed a torch. I considered running outside and grabbing some grass to make one, but I didn't want to risk being attacked. Instead, I listened to the rain and the thunder. It was a relaxing sound. This was clearly a choice by the developers, and I'm glad they made it. I could go for hours listening to the pattering of the water drops outside and the low rumble of thunder which followed each flash of lightning. A cup of warm tea or hot chocolate would make this moment truly cozy. My moment of chill vibes was disrupted by my campfire going out once more. I only had a wild vine and 2 sticks to burn. Neither lasted long, and soon only faint embers gave the slightest bit of light. I hoped this darkness would not be enough for drifters to spawn in my hut. I knew they could spawn practically on top of a player during a temporal storm, but I didn't know if for any other instance there was a minimum distance before they would spawn. Thankfully, the faintest of morning light was growing outside. Once I could see the land, I decided to risk leaving. The first thing I wanted to do was check a gray patch on my map. It was likely another hole in the ground, but I wanted to be sure, so I made my way over several hills, paused at some ruins, and marked both the ruins and nearby peat on my map. I found my first cracked vessel, which contained some galena, also known as lead. The patch turned out to be gravel, which wasn't that interesting. What was interesting was that the map now showed a large gray area of land. The gray was just pale enough to maybe be white, which could potentially indicate an area of chalkstone or some other material I would need for making leather. I decided to investigate. On the way, I passed another redwood forest, several caves, and a distraction. The distraction was a large collection of ruins, the kind that indicated a village might have once stood where only broken walls remained. One of the ruins even had an aged torch holder, which would keep a single torch lit indefinitely. I decided to leave it for now and return once I had established my base. As I continued to explore the ruins, I broke several cracked vessels and discovered a piece of surface copper, which I naturally marked on my map. I began to wonder if I should build my base nearby. There was even a trader named Samoset who provided local goods. Not that I would need such common items, but they could be useful. At the very least, it would be easy to sell whatever I produced. The area had one downside: granite. That gray spot on the map was a huge field of granite sand and gravel. As I reconsidered my options, I spotted an animal I hadn't seen before: gazelle. They bounded away before I could draw near, but the mere glimpse of these animals was enough to excite me. The discovery of termite mounds was less exciting. I had no interest in eating bugs, and so I had no use for the mounds. As I headed back, I spotted a tall yellow flower. Sunflowers, to be precise. They dropped seeds, same as any crop, and I wondered what I could make with sunflower seeds. Were they a grain to be used in baking? Or was sunflower oil a new ingredient I could extract for recipes? I was excited to find out. I continued exploring, and soon the granite turned to peridot. The land opened to more patches of water, and soon I was near a large lake. Perhaps this was where I could build my home, although I had no desire to landscape around the great number of small ponds. I paused a moment as the clouds parted and a beautiful scenic view opened before me. I was tempted, but only for a moment. A new set of ruins introduced conglomerate stone, and nearby I found another yellow apple tree. There was even a group of wild pigs roaming the area, but I just didn't feel inspired to build here, so I moved on. Eventually, I came across another trader by the name of Felipe, who sold furniture and marked his wagon on my map. Nearby was another set of ruins. This one had an interesting shape to the broken structures, the kind of shape which whispered of secrets hidden below. But by this time, my pockets were rather full, and I would have to leave the cracked vessels for another day. Still, my interest was piqued, and I wanted to stay nearby so I could inspect these ruins more thoroughly once I was settled. The discovery of limestone nearby all but solidified my desire to settle in this area, but by now darkness was falling. I stopped to collect more sunflower seeds, but I had already waited too long to create a shelter. My only hope was Felipe. I stopped when I heard the buzzing of bees, marked my map before dodging a boat horn, and hurried to the safety of Felipe's wagon. Felipe was even kind enough to let me sleep in his bed. If I settled nearby, I could see him becoming a reliable friend. Morning came, and I made my way to the nearby lake. It had a flattish area that would be good for building, plenty of cattails, and even some wild pigs. By all accounts, it was a good place to settle. But I wasn't satisfied. I walked the edge of the lake, admiring the scenery, but not feeling that spark which called me to build. Once I reached the other side, I paused and checked my map. A single location caught my attention. A small outcrop of water, which pulled away from the rest of the lake. The land around it seemed reasonably flat, and it wasn't too far from the redwoods I admired. I decided to cut across a bit of land which split the lake in two, and made my way towards the location which held my interest. As I emerged from the trees, a mountain rose before my eyes. Its impressive lines caused me to pause for a moment. In front of the mountain was the offshoot from the lake. The surrounding land gently sloped towards the water, creating the perfect place for terraced farms. It wasn't too far from the ruins, or Felipe, and it even had the redwoods and cypress nearby. I could imagine building up the side of the mountain to create a vertical village. In fact, I considered building my home right against the base of that mountain. However, I quickly changed my mind once I saw just how many open caves were at the base. I still wanted to build the vertical village, but I thought it would be better to keep my base further away. So I gathered cattails to make a reed chest. I needed to empty my pockets for wood and clay so I could start settling in. As I gathered the materials, I paused. I felt the stir of creativity within me. A single redwood in the middle of a lake, surrounded by cypress trees. My mind swam with tree houses and bungalows. Yes, this was where I would build. I took a moment to move the home icon on my map to the new location. I then swam to the small island and put my reed chest on the cypress branch before flattening the land a bit. As I did, I spotted a fruit tree nearby. Pink apple, the same kind I had been growing in my last world. Now, I just needed materials to start my base. I wanted to use redwood, but the trees were huge and my pockets were small. I made a couple more axes and tried to find the smallest redwood of the lot. To my surprise, it only filled a couple slots in my basket. I thought maybe I could carry a second tree's worth of wood. So I picked the next smallest tree and began chopping. This small redwood was considerably bigger, and my pockets were far too small for all the logs. I gathered what I could and headed back to the place I had chosen to build my home. I imagined docks for a raft, or maybe a bridge to the next plot of land. But first, I needed a raised platform to act as my home. It would look better with planks, but logs would have to do. I decided to add a roof and contemplated how I would do the walls. Part of me wanted to just put in a railing, but the appearance of bowtorn reminded me why that would be a bad idea. I needed actual walls. I replaced some of the logs with leftover rammed earth. I also needed to collect the rest of the logs before they despawned. I had less than 10 minutes. Night was falling, and I had no bed. So I jumped into the water, swam to the shore, and fell in a hole. Luckily, it was a small hole, and it didn't take long for me to grab the remaining logs and return to what would eventually become my base. This wasn't my ideal treehouse, but it would do to get through the night. This also seemed like a good place to stop. Next time, I would make a proper starter base. Thank you for watching, everyone, and remember, take care of yourself.